Deep in the island of Java in the early 80s, whispers spread of an anonymous man with abilities that should be impossible. Electric shocks that could heal ailments, energy manipulation, and the power to start fires with a bare hand. The man didn't want to reveal his real name to the Westerners who came to see what he was doing. The secrecy of his ancient sect forbade any outsiders from getting too close. But some managed to get some footage anyway, and they paid a price for their recording.
When he heard we'd shown this footage in public, he was very upset and refused all our future efforts to contact him again.
If this man were interested in fame and fortune, wouldn't he be eager to continue talking to the people filming him? But by all accounts, after his demonstration, he seemed to vanish into thin air. I looked deeper for where this clip came from and what I could find of the man's background. What I found was so incredible, it had me wondering what it could really mean if there are people out there quietly cultivating superpowers that nobody ever gets to see. Join me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's out of this world. In 1988, PBS aired a docuseries made by the Blair brothers, Lorne and Lawrence, called Ring of Fire, an Indonesian Odyssey. With a background in filmmaking, the Blair brothers had set off in 1972 with seed money from the BBC and Ringo Starr, believe it or not, to travel around Indonesia, capturing the culture, people, and little-known practices of an area of the world most Westerners never get a glimpse of. If you think Ringo is the weirdest part of this whole thing, this is just the beginning. In the early 80s, the Blairs met a man in the Chinatown of Java, which is one of the islands in Indonesia. He didn't want his real name revealed, so the brothers called him Dynamo Jack, or DJ. I'll call him both throughout this episode. The Blairs were interested because DJ had a healing practice in Java where he directed energy into the bodies of his patients. Sometimes using acupuncture needles and sometimes just his hands, Dynamo Jack directed his energy, which he called chi, into people's bodies, healing them. The Blairs followed him around Java for years, asking him over and over to be able to film him. He refused every time. Why? He said his powers came from an ancient meditation practice whose workings were to remain secret. In 1987, though, the brothers broke through completely by accident. Lorne, one of the brothers, was suffering from an eye infection, and Dynamo Jack agreed to let them film while he was healing him. What it involved shocked them all. Literally. Lorne said while DJ was touching his body, he was getting powerful electric shocks and couldn't control the movements of his body at all. Their cameraman and a few guys with them were skeptical, so Dynamo Jack demonstrated by shocking them too. When their sound recordist placed her hand on DJ's stomach, he gave her such a shock that she jumped away in amazement and pain, and that wasn't all. Dynamo Jack took their newspaper, crumpled it up, and showed how his chi could be used to set things on fire. That day, everyone was very cheerful and, of course, grateful for his demonstrations and for the healing. But later, when he found out they'd betrayed him by showing his footage in public, he refused to speak to them again. I mean, why were you letting them shoot in the first place, Dynamo Jack? You should have known those Westerners were going to publish that everywhere, because that's what I would do. So how did his mysterious powers work? Well, first, Dynamo Jack revealed to them that he meditates every day. He claimed it wasn't because he was special that he could do these things, but that he devoted himself fully to his practice. He described yin and yang energy, or negative and positive chi. DJ said that when the positive and negative energy inside his body meet, it can create electricity. Now, as a Westerner, this seems pretty incredible and even hard to believe. Although if you think about it, when a cold front and a hot front meet one another in weather, it creates all kinds of storms and electricity that way too. So, I mean, if this is happening in your body, why not? Anyway, I looked up how electricity is made in general. Basically, when tiny particles called electrons move from one atom to another, electricity is created. That's what's going on in the weather too. But that's not always something we see with our eyes, of course. When we feel static electricity, we can sense the imbalance of positively and negatively charged atoms, which are looking for a way to disperse their excess charge so they can return to a balanced state. That happens when you touch something and get a small shock. You can feel it. There are also electrical currents, like the electricity in the wires that power your light switches, for example. That's when electrons are constantly moving between atoms. So in just a few words, when he was describing what was happening inside his body, Dynamo Jack's explanation of yin and yang energy meeting to generate electricity matched up with what we understand about electricity and particles. When he directed a stream of energy into someone's body, that seemed to be like his own generated electrical current or something. But clearly there's more to this than only a particle and electricity explanation. He knew something more about energy itself. I mean, over in the West, we know how to use electricity, but we don't see people who can heal just with their energy or generate fire with their hands. That's where the ancient practice came in again, and the more I heard, the more I realized there's so much more beyond the current understanding of modern medicine, electrical science, and our own potential that could be uncovered if we opened our minds to what's quietly and secretly been practiced for millennia deep in ancient traditions, if we can find them. Want to hear about some of those secrets? Because I did find some, and the revelations are incredible. Dynamo Jack said he'd studied his meditation practice for 18 years, meditating every day. He said that although everyone has yin and yang energy, it takes discipline and meditation to awaken your abilities and control them. DJ gave them a warning. For one, you have to be very aware of your emotions, because energy can be dangerous and kill as well as heal. Just think of Anakin Skywalker going off the deep end when he couldn't control his emotions, for instance.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
After DJ explained about self-control was when he showed the Blairs his fire demonstration. He wasn't showing off as much as helping them understand the powerful and destructive capability of energy manipulation. In fact, in the Blairs documentary, they said Dynamo Jack told them this chi stuff was only the surface, and the real adventure was beneath in the meditation technique. Well, how do we know? In 1997, 10 years after he'd healed Lauren Blair's eyes, Dynamo Jack unexpectedly tracked down Lawrence because he needed to tell him his story. I'll get back to this in a little while, but first let's look at what Lawrence was finally allowed to record on camera. Dynamo Jack had dozens of students who tried to master certain techniques, like pushing a plastic chopstick through a hard wooden bench, like actually through it. Of the people they filmed that day, some students made dents, and Dynamo Jack could push his stick all the way through. Students also learned to push the contents of a sealed bottle into a bucket below, like this guy right here.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's crazy. Is this some kind of magic trick? What's going on? Is it an illusion? They're claiming this is real. And maybe the most incredible thing they filmed was how Dynamo Jack was able to use his chi to block attacks. Now get this, they shot his hand with a BB gun, which would hurt like hell, by the way, but he simply caught the pellets without suffering any damage to his skin. So how'd he do it? At that close range, his hand should have been one big bruise or even needed the BB surgically removed from his hand. Okay, how could catching a bullet even be possible? I mean, maybe you can train to catch a fly with chopsticks like Miyagi, but avoiding major injuries, is anyone else able to do this? Well, yes. You've probably seen in kung fu movies how some practitioners of martial arts train by punching logs repeatedly or being smacked with sticks over and over again. This is a real thing that some practices have historically done, because they figured out that by learning to control their chi through physical exercises, they could build up some kind of mysterious or higher energy that could protect them from those attacks. If you're a little skeptical, just ask why anyone would subject themselves to such brutal training if there weren't any benefit at the end of all of that. But there are lots of dojos around, and we have martial artists going on TV all the time, right? Why don't we see any of them able to do such supernatural things as catch a bullet with their hands or push a stick through a table? I know you're asking that question. Well, Dynamo Jack answered that for us himself with a major mistake he made, which was a significant turning point in his life. Well, Lawrence Blair brought a number of doctors and scientists to Indonesia to study him. They tested him with a metal detector to see if he was concealing anything, which he wasn't. They measured him with a voltmeter to see what kind of readings his body was giving off, and incredibly, he was able to turn on a small LED light bulb with just his fingers. Scientifically, it was hard to prove what they could see with their own eyes, that DJ was able to heal people and generate electricity with his hands and light a light bulb with his fingers. But even though they couldn't find a scientific explanation, the group was having so much fun, Dynamo Jack took them out to lunch. In the heat of the moment, he tried to show them again that he could push a chopstick through the formica surface of a table. Weirdly, though, it didn't go through easily this time, and he thought maybe it was better to come up through the bottom instead, through an inch of wood. Well, he did manage to get the stick through, but he cut his own hand in the process, and a piece of the chopstick broke off, hitting their companion Allison between the eyes and cutting her too. Looking back the next day, it appeared to be a warning. All right, now check this out. The next day, Dynamo Jack was very upset. He claimed that he'd been visited all night by his old master who had passed away. His teacher was enraged that DJ had broken the strict rules of his sect, never to show off in public and never to cause harm or draw blood. Dynamo Jack ordered all further filming to end, and he stopped accepting any new students. Showing off had gotten him chastised by his own teacher and got him kicked out as the head teacher of the current group of students. Showing off had even seemed to make his powers not work as well that day in the restaurant. So why risk all these things going wrong by revealing to outsiders the inner workings of his school at all? I mean, DJ had told the Blairs years earlier that the public wasn't supposed to know about it, right? Well, that's where things got even more metaphysical, when they learned where he'd been and what he'd been doing in the decade they hadn't seen him. Remember that 10 years after their first meeting, Dynamo Jack had contacted Lawrence out of the blue, wanting to tell him information? That's because DJ had just come back from 2 years all alone deep in the heart of Borneo on a meditation journey. During his meditation, he'd seen a vision of the world, showing him how history was moving on into great change. The old wisdom, as he put it, was vanishing. DJ wanted Lawrence to film just enough of him to remind people that we all have undreamed of powers within us, and that there's nothing special about him except his training and awakening. Some of you might be asking, well, Rob, what do you think? Well, Dynamo Jack wasn't the first person to ever demonstrate impossible sounding abilities in history. In my episode on martial arts, and also in the one about real-life immortals, I spoke of Zhang Sanfeng, the inventor of Tai Chi. He cultivated such incredible abilities, it was said to have solved the problem of death itself. There are also accounts of Tibetan monks and Christian saints who could levitate, like St. Joseph of Cupertino, psychics who could bend spoons like Uri Geller, and people who used meditation and breathwork to become impervious to extreme cold, like Wim Hof. There's even a monk named Jigong who predicted a huge mountain peak would crash onto a village before it happened. Legend has it that using his abilities, he aimed his palm at a boulder that was about to crush a child and stopped it with his bare hands. I had an episode on that too, so it's certainly possible Dynamo Jack really cultivated the abilities he was filmed performing. When he was young, it seems like Dynamo Jack knew that showing off wasn't allowed and that this knowledge was solemn and sacred. His spiritual sect had survived this long by not telling people about it and not letting it be tainted by selfish motives. I mean, just think about what would happen if this got out into society that this was legit. Would the government come after these people? Would there be other people trying to find them and disturb the people or the practitioners practicing this? There seems to be a lot on the line. You could just think, well, hey, just use supernormal abilities and hide yourself, but who knows if it even works that way? I mean, there's a lot of dangers out there that we're not aware of. But when Dynamo Jack was alone on his meditation journey, he realized that the world needed to know he existed, if only to remind them that such amazing things indeed are real, and that humans have potential capabilities most of us never even consider. That initial motive for his coming back to society was a pretty good one. But living in the real world is harder than living in a forest all by yourself, because there's temptation when you're with other people to do things like get caught up in the moment and show off your abilities, which he did. You know, Jedi training in Star Wars is based on these kinds of meditation practices where you cultivate your inner self in order to cultivate your skills. You remember Master Yoda saying things like, do or do not, there is no try, or control, control, you must learn control.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
I don't believe it.
It's why you fail.
That's right, Jedi Masters are based on Qigong and Taoist masters in history. So maybe Dynamo Jack really was visited by his old teacher in a dream after he got excited and showed off. And maybe there are others out there in the world with amazing skills too, but we just don't see them because it would break the rules of this world to go around demonstrating them, unless it's for a higher purpose. I found an interview with a Westerner who came to study the meditation practice under Dynamo Jack, named Jim McMillan. He got footage of people burning holes in a cup from a distance like a laser. Jim saw many more amazing things that he didn't get on camera and learned to do such things himself. What's interesting is that Jim said Dynamo Jack was warned by his ancestor spirit another time not to teach Westerners, but for some reason, DJ ignored the warning and accepted Jim. Maybe he did it for the same reason he sought out Lawrence. He knew this knowledge couldn't remain hidden and potentially even die with his sect. It needed to be shared with the world because humanity is at a time of change, and as he said, the old wisdom is indeed disappearing as people take material reality to be the only reality. Maybe what Dynamo Jack wanted to leave behind wasn't a recording of him doing amazing things. Perhaps all he wanted was to leave us with a small glimmer of hope in our minds that we're so much more than we thought. And maybe, just maybe, we can do amazing things too. In fact, I've covered some of these stories in other episodes, like one about the psychic little girl who turned down a part in The Exorcist. But that's not all I found, so leave me a comment if you want me to dive into stories like the 3-year-old kid who could start fires with her mind, or accounts of people that would make Eleven from Stranger Things look like child's play. And hey, if you've ever been able to do something that should be impossible, share your story below. Remember to like and subscribe to the Metaphysical channel so you don't miss out on any updates or content drops, and make sure you have all your notifications turned on. If you want to support my work and get access to bonus content, you can subscribe to themetaphysical.tv, where I have more than 1,000 videos on mysteries, ancient civilizations, and more. Here's a big shout out to all our current subscribers because we couldn't keep making this content without you. If you'd like to get yourself a bag of metaphysical coffee, visit the links in the description as well. Thanks so much for watching, and with that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.